In the midst of a shaky ceasefire, the United States and Iran are currently attempting to negotiate a formal peace agreement. There is a common public assumption that a signed treaty represents a definitive finish line, a moment where a long-standing hostility is finally settled by the stroke of a pen. But the historical record suggests that for massive rival powers, a peace deal is often just a way to pause one conflict while preparing for the next. To understand if a deal between the US and Iran can actually hold, we have to look at the 400-year rivalry between ancient Rome and Persia. Their cycle of failed diplomacy shows why peace agreements often create more problems than they solve. The relationship between Rome and ancient Persia began with a total collapse of diplomacy. In 53 BCE, a Roman invasion ended in a massacre near Carrhae, where thousands of soldiers died alongside their general Crassus. After decades of further fighting, the Romans were forced into a 20 BCE peace agreement that recognized the Euphrates River as the absolute limit of their territory. For an empire built on constant expansion, this was a massive concession. Instead of securing a lasting peace, this deal simply allowed the Persian rulers to stop worrying about their western border. It gave them the breathing room they needed to consolidate their own power. This pattern shows that stopgap concessions rarely remove the underlying threat. Often, they just grant an adversary the time needed to rebuild and prepare for their next strike. The focal point of this long struggle was the Kingdom of Armenia. Because it sat directly between the two empires, it became a strategic buffer zone that both powers were determined to control. In 63 CE, they reached a highly complex compromise. The Parthians would choose the Armenian king, but that king had to travel to Rome to be physically crowned by the emperor. It was a face-saving solution that worked on paper, but it eventually became impossible to maintain. When the Parthians eventually ignored the rules, it triggered a massive Roman invasion in 114 CE that saw the capture of the Persian capital. While these types of intricate diplomatic puzzles can temporarily stop a war, they are notoriously fragile. Once the immediate pressure of conflict fades, the administrative burden of the deal often causes it to collapse. By the 3rd century, the conflict escalated under the new Sasanian rulers of Persia. This rock relief depicts the Sasanian king Shapur I on horseback, towering over the Roman emperor Valerian, who was captured in battle in 260 CE. When Rome eventually extracted its revenge in 299 CE, they used their victory to impose the Treaty of Nisibis. They forced the Persians to accept deep territorial cuts and handed total control of Armenia over to Rome. But this total victory ultimately backfired. 60 years later, the Persian king Shapur II launched a fresh invasion with the explicit goal of tearing up that specific treaty and reclaiming what had been lost. Agreements based on the humiliation of a defeated rival rarely create stability. Instead, they transform a border dispute into a generational motive for revenge. The ultimate example of this futility was the Eternal Peace of 532. Despite its ambitious name, the deal lasted less than 8 years before the two empires were back at war. In the end, it took Rome and Persia over 4 centuries and dozens of failed treaties before they finally reached a stable agreement to partition Armenia and settle their borders in the 380s. As US and Iranian officials navigate their own shaky ceasefire today, they are facing the same core difficulties that broke these ancient agreements: the temptation to choose a quick diplomatic victory over a long-term solution. If a new deal relies on stopgap timing or fragile face-saving measures, history suggests the resulting peace will only hold until one side feels strong enough to break it. Rome and Persia required hundreds of years of conflict and failed pacts before they reached a lasting arrangement. Their history shows that a signed treaty is rarely the end of the story. It is just one difficult step in an incredibly long process.